Okay, good morning. It's 10 o'clock, so I think we're going to get the things rolling here. Welcome to the Food Safety and Quality Roundup. My name is Brian Dunning. I'm the chair of the Almond Quality and Food Safety Committee at the Almond Board of California. Join me today will be Tim Birmingham, staff of the Almond Board of California, and also Guang Wei, who we all know as Guang Wei. So thank you for being here. We've got really a nice overview of some of the current research and activities we're involved with at the committee. So we're really looking forward on going through some of these projects today. Kind of an overview and some new subjects, some related to old subjects, topics, but you know, we'll leave some time at the end for questions, so we'll be happy to respond and answer those as well. The formal description: why were almond growers granted enforcement discretion for FDA produce safety requirements? Is hydrogen cyanide an issue in California? What are the current approaches for maximizing almond shelf life? What's the deal with aflatoxin? You know, with aflatoxin, something that I've heard about when I joined the industry in 2007, and of course when the pasteurization rule went in, and you know, a lot of work's been done over the years, but it's still an issue in some markets today, many markets today. So we'll talk a little bit where we are on that. So we hope to answer some of those questions. We look forward to going through these topics. I know we've got a number of slides put together. So I am going to jump in. I think I'm going to join the table over here for our discussion. And moving ahead, the first topic of the day is pasteurization and efficacy for insect deinfestation. Pasteurization's now been around quite a while, well over a decade. And we've done some work lately related to disinfestation. So I'm going to start right off and kick it over to Tim. And why don't you tell us a little bit about this project and where it came from, and also there's a connection to our almond leadership program with this as well, Tim. So.
Yeah, so thanks, Brian, and we're going to do this a little informal today. Hopefully that's okay. We're going to sit at the table, and we've got some slides, and we're going to just kind of talk through at a high level some of the research that we've done, some of the past year, and some we've been doing multiple years. This project, actually, it's pretty exciting. We get questions, you know, often from handlers, from their customers about, you know, infestation in almonds, and you know, what is the efficacy of pasteurization. We hear this from time to time that, you know, handlers have received concerns or complaints from their customers because they see insects in product that's been pasteurized. Intuitively, we think, or we thought that, you know, pasteurization was good for controlling, you know, all life stages of insects, but we didn't have really any good data to support that hypothesis. So we had the opportunity here working with one of our leadership participants who came to us. She was new with Olam, Michelle Brazil, and you know, she had a concern from a customer of theirs. And so she asked us, you know, about this, and at the same time, she was looking to do a leadership program project. She was a leadership participant. And so Guang Wei and I met with her, and we said, you know, we think this would be a great project. It's something we wanted to do. You have some of the resources to conduct, you know, do some of this work at your facility, and we would like to help get behind this. The other part of it, too, so you see Michelle here on the left, Dr. Sandeepa Gautam, we had worked with her looking at phosphine resistance when she was a postgrad at Oklahoma State. And she had recently transferred to UC Riverside, got a position, but was working out of the Kearney Ag Center. And she had access to resources and facilities to rear these insects. And we reached out to her to see if she might be interested in working on this project as well. So it really kind of all came together. It was really a nice fit. Working with researchers that understood some of the challenges with insects with almonds, and then Michelle, who had some of the facilities and was willing to help us get in and conduct some of this work. So we're really excited about it, and actually Michelle will be presenting on her project at 1:30 on the almond leadership stage. The leadership program participants, they share their presentations every year, and she was actually chosen as the one to present today. So I would encourage you, for more high-level detail, to go and see her talk. It's just outside of the registration. There's a stage set up downstairs, and that's at 1:30. So she'll give you more detail on this project. But we're excited about it because now we've done some work. We've got some data, and that data, does indeed show that pasteurization is good for controlling life stages of insects.
Okay, Tim, you going to go over some of the goals of the study and how it was carried out?
Yeah, so, really what we did here is we wanted to look at, a couple of insects, Indian meal moth and red flower beetle. These are insects that are facility insects that are of concern in almonds. We looked at the different life stages, so eggs, larvae, pupae, and adults. And then we wanted to look at, a couple of different processes, or a few different processes. So we looked at steam under vacuum, so that would be the H2O express type technology. So steam at a reduced temperature, like 160 Fahrenheit range for about a 4-hour process. Propylene oxide, that's a chemical treatment. We have a lot of PPO capacity, so we really wanted to gather some data to look at the efficacy of PPO. Steam and moist heat, so steam under atmospheric conditions, which is going to be roughly 212 Fahrenheit for roughly about a minute. And then phosphine fumigation. We wanted to compare these processes to a traditional process for controlling insects.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep.
Guangwei, we can always count on you with our committee and projects to get involved in the technical part of that. Why don't you explain a little bit about this project and the results?
So the project actually is quite simple. It's tedious effort there. It's really just to propagate the two type of insects into different life stage, and then infest with almond, put in the permeable pouch, and then insert, place into the center of the carton boxes, if it's or maybe in the bin, inside the bin, or embedded with the product on the continuous conveyor. And then after treatment, you just do mortality verification. That's very simple, actually.
Okay. And I understand we've got some charts, so maybe you could...
Oh, yeah, this is just an example. The results is very exciting. So everything, from all four process we evaluate, is basically those, wipe out. So those 4 bar, the green, the blue, or, the orange bar is basically represent 100% mortality. That's from the treatment, each of those treatment. That's one example from the inline steam process. And then in comparison, there's small natural die-off from untreated, the inoculate sample, infested sample. So they're showing 100% effectiveness of all 4 processes, including 3 pasteurization process and our typical phosphine fumigation process.
Yeah, and I think just to add here, so this is key that we have this data now that we never really had. So when we get these questions or concerns that would come into us, we would say, well, we think these processes are efficient for controlling all the life cycles, and if you're seeing infestation, it's probably a post-process or a storage type issue. But everyone knows that the customer is going to push back without data. So now we have some data. So I think this is a very important step for us as we move forward.
So basically, conclusion we can learn is, all 4 process has, including 3 pasteurization process and the fumigation of effectively control insects at all life stage. So anything, if noticed by the customer at their end, that can be only indication of post-treatment reinfestation. So this is a good information for us, for industry to have, to communicate with our buyers.
So Tim, what would be the next steps now? We've completed this. We've got some good data that hopefully we can share. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, so the project will be published. So Dr. Sandeepa will publish this. So we'll have a published paper, a reference point that we can direct people to. Typically what we do is once we have a published paper is we will create a fact sheet that will then share with the industry so that when you get concerns from your customers, you can share that information as well. And then it'll be referencing that peer-reviewed published journal. So you'll have something that you can hand to your customers that says, if you're storing the product properly and it's been subjected to one of these processes, you should not see, insect issues in the product.
I might inject one comment from my personal perspective or expectation. After we publish the paper, hopefully we have the scientific data to communicate to the regulator or even the foreign country. Those pasteurization definitely can be alternate for the phytosanitary requirement fumigation. That being, if that get approval, maybe you have a chance to eliminate some, fumigation. Yeah.
So the benefits of pasteurization continue. So, and you alluded to this, Tim. I think, what I've seen over the years that, we've continued to build on that body of research. And you talked about how, the research we've done, the connection with our researchers, and, and their connection with us and understanding our products and how to do this. So, that's been, I can't even begin to describe the benefits that has provided us as we've moved forward with additional research, because, they're very familiar with us. We're now very familiar with them, and it's really helped to facilitate a lot of good research and quickly get it reviewed and peer published, and so that's exciting.
And Brian, just to add on to that, so oftentimes when we talk about unintended consequences, we're worried about some of those things that may happen that don't benefit the industry, and this is definitely something that benefits the industry, is leveraging the work that we've done in pasteurization so that we can come out with further guidance that benefits and supports the industry. And also, along those lines with pasteurization, we've seen some unintended consequences along the way that have benefited the industry. This is one, but the other one most recently is with the produce safety rule. Growers don't have to comply with produce safety because of the pasteurization program that we have in place. And FDA's offered that enforcement discretion to growers, so they don't have to comply. It's based solely upon our pasteurization program. So again, we like to kind of leverage some of these programs and see how much mileage we can truly get out of them. And this is an example of how we're doing that.
Okay. All right, moving right along here. We've got to stay on time. I hope I'm keeping us on track. So from age-old issue of insects and infestation to maybe somewhat of a newer issue, amygdalin and hydrogen cyanide that has popped up in the last couple years. Again, here's another example where some of our research that we've done in the past related to flavor, chemistry analysis, and quality of almonds has been able to facilitate some of our understanding when addressing some of these as they've come up. And again, there never seems, as we think that we've thought of everything, there never seems to be a lack or re-emerging issues that continue to pop up from time to time in the various markets. So, Tim, can you tell us what the current issues related to amygdalin and hydrogen cyanide in almonds, and particularly for the EU?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most everyone knows where almond flavor comes from. It's really the breakdown of amygdalin, and if you want a more detailed explanation of kind of the flavor profiles and how that works, talk to Guang Wei, and he'll be happy to give you an hour explanation on that. But the short answer of where flavor comes from, it's really when you chew the almonds, you have enzymatic conversion that's happening that's resulting in the release of benzaldehyde, and then it also releases hydrogen cyanide at the same time at low levels. California almonds, sweet varieties, do not have hydrogen cyanide at high levels, but there will be some that's present, when you break down that amygdalin. The EU is really sensitive to levels of hydrogen cyanide, and recently they did propose, establishing limits. Initially, they proposed a limit of 20 part per billion, and they backed off that a little bit to 35 part per billion. But it was something, we were, I don't want to say we were concerned, but we didn't have really any strong data looking at levels of HCN in almonds. What we had is a lot of data looking at the level of amygdalin in almonds, and we had conducted work over 4 years looking at a number of different varieties and measuring levels of amygdalin in almonds. And we found various ranges. It was dependent on the harvest season as well as the variety. But we had levels of amygdalin as high as a couple hundred part per billion. Now, amygdalin doesn't 100% break down to hydrogen cyanide. We, by calculation, could estimate the level of hydrogen cyanide in almonds. and roughly, 1 part of amygdalin will break down to 0.06 parts HCN. So it's a very small amount that is actually converted to HCN. But we didn't have any solid data to support, what the actual level was. And the EU is saying they're going to establish these limits and start to utilize laboratories in Europe to test. So this was a bit of concern to us, so we really wanted to kind of get in and try to, better understand if we measured HCN, how does that compare with our previous data, and is it going to be a concern for us moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Guangwei, I bet we've got some data that you could talk about on this subject.
Sure, just like you said, that we did, the committee did invest in several projects, look at the variation of amygdalin level in the almonds in different crop season, between different variety and different region. But the purpose for that project is really trying to understand flavor variability between different almond variety in different regions. So that has given us good data. You can see, we've done 4 years data with a 3 years data published in a peer review paper. You extract those data out and plot in a chart. You see this is represented different, each bar represented the level of range of the amygdalin level of each variety. The dot represent the average. So you can see, by average, outrage or Fred always offer strongest, highest level of amygdalin. Therefore, they have strongest almond flavor, followed by different variety. But get to the lower side in the build independence, you probably barely see any amygdalin level. But the one thing I just want to point out to you is that you can see those bars, so how long, how high, those represent the variation of a same variety in a different, collected from different region or different years. So that's a huge variation, So you basically, we have done, so as the team mentioned, we did our work on amygdalin, but we don't have a direct data on hydrogen cyanide. Based on our understanding of a conversion or complete hydrolysis of amygdalin to release hydrogen cyanide shouldn't be a concern for any the proposed limit by EU Food Authority. But they, like I mentioned by the team, we want to make sure we have a solid data. So we did that last year. We did that. The other project with a commercial laboratory. We collected a set of 42 samples out of 42 samples out of 14 varieties. We sent it to the commercial lab to run amygdalin. Also sent one lab in Europe to run hydrogen cyanide. And this is basically amygdalin level. The level is very comparable with our historical research data published by our researcher from UC Davis. There's a commercial lab, the results on amygdalin is very comparable. Again, you can see highest one is from outrage and Fred. And then also narrow variation range because it comes from one crop season. So next slide. So then, so now that we did the hydrogen cyanide, actually read the number of hydrogen cyanide. It's just, highest one is 11 ppm. It's much low. It's very correlate with the range of variation or range of amygdalin. It's much lower than the EU proposed 35 ppm limit. So that's basically, we should, most of those varieties doesn't have any. So that's the, and then next slide probably you want to say. So we also, because each lab uses a different procedure, we send it to, send a subset of a sample, basically one each of a variety, with in total of 14 samples to other lab to run the hydrogen cyanide. You can see one lab, basically each lab have a different limit of detection. So one lab only detect the hydrogen cyanide in 2 samples out of 14 samples. Other lab, it's also probably have more positive detection. But again, the level is very low. So this is not a concern for us to meet the EU proposed limit.
And just to add to that, so, why we tested for 2 labs in the EU, Whenever the EU starts to talk about establishing regulatory limits and then they start to talk about laboratory procedures and reference labs, we get a little bit worried that there may be lack of consistency with what we're doing here, or maybe even the labs that are doing the work in Europe aren't equipped to do the work or may not have the best methodology. And so here were a couple of different labs that we knew had good methodologies but were different. And we wanted to see what the variability was with the same set of samples that was submitted to two different labs, one in Europe, one in Italy, and one in Germany. And then we also know that the EU is looking at a different methodology as well. So we're sharing this information with the EU so they understand that there is some variability. I mean, obviously, we're well below the proposed limit of 35 ppb, but we do have some that are approaching 10. And if you start to factor in differences in labs, you could see if a lab is less precise, levels even higher than that. And so this is the type of data we like to collect so that then we can go back and we can share this with the European Union and really make sure they understand some of the challenges around testing for things such as hydrogen cyanide.
Yeah, it's a good point, Tim. I think in the QA world, a lot of times we spend a good amount of our time trying to figure out why certain results from one lab don't agree with results from another lab. So, we really, this on a new emerging issue like this, it is really important to understand the different methodologies and what's being done out there to generate data, because policy is generally dictated from that data ultimately. So this gives us a better, comprehensive perspective of the issue.
So really, you talk about lab, results variation, because the two lab we use, they use a procedure slightly different from the one procedure, preferred by the EU reference lab. So they are proposing that the procedure, called CN 160. So there's all procedures have a same sample preparation or HCN extraction. So basically focus on total extraction of hydrogen cyanide. So, but the only difference is the filler measurement. One use the headspace GC, one for chemical titration, and the preferred procedure use HPLC, but end up they involve extra step of derivatization. So that means add extra interference and you reach the limit of detection higher. So it's really just, we just had to communicate with the, actually the two labs, we communicate with them. They said they are not prepared to change their procedure. They feel they have a confidence in their in their procedure. So most importantly, from the proposed official procedure, actually they have run through collaborative validation trial by 17 labs. So they have a set of a limit for repeatability of at the 8 ppm, and also reproducibility error at the 15 ppm. Basically, you see, I'm kind of I hope don't confuse you. So all those error, 8 ppm or 15 ppm, is much higher than ever on, we found out from almond and in our California almond. It's less serious. Basically, anytime you test or detect the level, it's within their procedure error range. So that gives you totally useless information. So we definitely also plus that, already mentioned by Tim, is this procedures measure total hydrogen cyanide, but not necessarily represent the actual hydrogen cyanide risk or exposure, because not all amygdalin in the almond going to be convert to release all hydrogen cyanide when you consume, especially after you blanched, after you roasted. Actually, those hydrogen cyanide will never be broken down, released to hydrogen cyanide. So we really need to communicate with when we generate more data, we have a comprehensive project ongoing with UC Davis to look at more thoroughly, trying to understand, we generate more data to we're going to do side-by-side measurement of amygdalin, hydrogen cyanide. We also look at other potential cyanogenic compounds in addition to amygdalin, so that we have all our background covered. So and then we can communicate with the EU. Do we really need the, test hydrogen cyanide in California almonds? If we all have all information, maybe we can ask an exemption, right?
Right, right.
Anyway,
Okay.
Just too much comment.
Thanks for the overview, Guangwei. No, great. I really appreciate it. This is another example where, again, the Almond Board is staying ahead of some of these emerging issues, and I know ABC will continue to communicate and share that information on what's happening and continuing to look at this. And as you say, we're involved with some of the work with UC Davis that's helping out on this as well. So, Another issue, aflatoxin. Going back again in 2007 when I joined the industry, I'm going to say about that time, the EU was rejecting 70 to 80 containers a year from the California industry. And what I learned yesterday from Big Bryce is that we've got substantial more volume than we did 14 years ago, maybe 50% more volume. So we did a lot of work at that time, and at that time the EU was still testing to default limits of 2 parts per billion, and we were getting rejections based on that. We went through a period of several years to get Codex to adopt a standard, and eventually once Codex adopted a standard for nuts, then in fact we got the EU to recognize that. So that greatly improved the situation, but lo and behold, it still remains today. It's still an issue today, but we've learned a lot. I think is at least the good news on this subject. So we've been able to take very preventative measures to address those. Tim, you want to? I know we've got some slides. You want to? Start out with an overview of where we are today on this subject.
So as Brian mentioned, aflatoxin is something that it never goes away. We have years that seems like it's more of a challenge. This past year, less of an issue in Europe. We only saw, I believe, we were at 6 rapid alerts for the year, compared to a few years earlier when we had higher insect damage and we saw 40 rejections. So it really does correlate with insect damage, but I think also the industry has done a great job of really recognizing kind of how to control it along the spectrum from farming all the way through to processing, and really implementing good controls and really understanding, when we do see years of higher insect damage, that it is necessary to maybe do a little bit more on the sorting side to help deal with that. But really, our approach with aflatoxin, and this has been based on as Brian mentioned, years of data that we've gathered, really to understand where it comes from and how to effectively control or mitigate levels in the product. But our approach really is to look at everything on the growing side. So how can we mitigate it at the orchard level? How can we prevent or minimize the potential spread of mold and aflatoxin development? How do we do that during stockpiling? As you get into the stockpile, you're really looking at more moisture, temperature, humidity type control. And then what are those things, post-harvest as you get into the processing? So what are the steps that you can do to potentially remove aflatoxin from the product, or even recondition the product if you have an issue with failing a regulatory limit? And then we have, all the work that happens, working with different regulatory agencies and governmental bodies around the world. With the EU, we've got the pre-export check program, where the EU has said that if you check product here before it ships, we'll test at a reduced frequency upon arrival in the EU. So that's been a great success for us as an industry. We still have challenges in countries like Japan, where 100% of the consignments are tested. And we're sending the best product over to Japan, but we still see rejections. And that's because of the elusive nature of aflatoxin. It really is that needle in a haystack. And there's also challenges with sampling and the way the Japanese are sampling the product. Our regulatory folks are working, to try to address some of those issues as well. So we're really looking at, how do we control aflatoxin, but then, how do we work with the regulatory agencies around the world? Now, as we kind of, look at more of the production side of things, there's a lot of potential for aflatoxin contamination in the orchard, but we really do have a forgiving product. And for most of the year, after harvest anyways, the product doesn't support mold growth. It won't support pathogenic growth. The water activity just isn't high enough. But there are, certain points during production where you can have moisture and relative humidity that can create conditions that are conducive for the mold to grow and potentially produce aflatoxin. The same thing can happen in stockpiles. If you have moisture that's building up in stockpiles, you're not properly managing those stockpiles, or you've brought in nuts that are too moist, you can have conditions that will lead to mold growth and potentially aflatoxin production. So we've worked with really kind of understanding and defining what those requirements are. Typically, if you can keep that moisture less than 82%, you're really not going to have any concerns with mold growth. Mold does like to grow at 80 degrees is kind of an optimum temperature. We don't really rely on temperature control so much for aflatoxin and mold. It's more about the water activity, but temperature can impact water activity if you're in a humid environment as well. But really our focus, as I mentioned, we're looking at how can we prevent the spread of the mold in the orchard. We do have some tools. We'll talk a little bit about how do we displace the mold that produces the toxin. We've done a scaled-up project that Guangwei we'll talk a little bit more about, where we've looked at AF36. It's an atoxigenic strain of Aspergillus. Aspergillus is a mold that produces aflatoxin, but we have a strain that doesn't produce aflatoxin. Done some work this year, scaling up to close to 5,000 acres, looking at if we put this mold in the orchard, what does it do to those strains that produce aflatoxin? So it's another tool. If we can outcompete the toxigenic producing strains, that's one way that we can help address it from the orchard level. We really understand a lot about the relationship between insect damage, mummy nuts, creating an opportunity for another flight of navel orangeworm. If you don't remove those mummy nuts, that can lead to increased insect pressure and more proliferation of mold and potentially aflatoxin. So a lot of steps along the production, the growing side that we're really looking at to really kind of understand and define those risks, and then to come up with mitigation strategies.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more. We commissioned a study a number of years ago that really helped us identify and focus where the aflatoxin's occurring. So can you go over this chart, explain that?
Yeah, this really kind of for us was a nail in the coffin as far as understanding the correlation between insect damage and aflatoxin. This is a study. We looked at 50 different lots of product. We had USDA inspectors pull large quantities of product and to divide them into these different grade factors, these grade categories that you see here. So we had high quality nuts that represented about 83.7% of the weight. We had mechanically damaged nuts, about 7.4% of the weight. Insect damage, which was about 7.2%. Then we had other defects, 1.5%. Then we had nuts that actually had visible mold. And you can see the levels of aflatoxin in each one of those fractions. And so the thing that really stands out here in this study, looking at these 50 different lots, the insect damage fraction represented 7.2%. So again, this wasn't the best quality product, but when you're dealing with aflatoxin, you need to try to find lower grade products so that you can actually find aflatoxin. But in this study, that insect portion, 7.2% of the total weight of the nuts reflected 76.3% of the aflatoxin mass. So this really does show that there is a strong correlation between insect damage and aflatoxin. It doesn't always mean that when you have insect damage, you're going to have aflatoxin, but when you do have aflatoxin, it's probably going to relate very highly or correlate very highly with insect damage.
Thanks, Tim. So Guangwei, we know we have a pre-export clearance program for Europe for aflatoxins. Work very well. They trust our results, so when we ship product, they don't. It's retested at a very, very low level. Some markets, however, have brought up the question, well, that's fine, you test it there, but how do we know what happens in storage and between, since we're shipping almonds all around the world that, what happens in between the point in time you ship it and test it and we receive it, wherever our market may be. So can you tell us a little bit about, what we've learned about storage and some of the, and maybe the transportation part of that?
I think definitely that's, there's a very puzzling, for all of us. We're trying to understand why we ship the ship, good quality product to Japan, but why, we have good, the very low level, but why they get rejected there. But I thought before that, Tim, you want to go back to one slide? I think there's something we have tried to see if the sorting can be reduced. Those stuff you want to offer a few comments about how the sorting can help?
Yeah, and this is more on the reconditioning. So what happens when you find aflatoxin, or how can you reduce levels of aflatoxin in a given lot? And another study that we did, looking at a number of different lots where you examine all the fractions of the products. You measure for aflatoxin on the incoming stream, and then you're looking at the sorting steps along the way. You're pulling those nuts out and you're analyzing for aflatoxin as well. And this work that we've done really does support that when you remove insect-damaged nuts. So in the case of this study here, you can see the laser sorter pulled out reject material that really concentrated the level of aflatoxin. We started with about 3 part per billion. That first laser sorter pass kicked out rejects that had about 30 part per billion. And then the hand sorting was even more effective in this study. We concentrated even further to about 40 part per billion. So this is indeed showing that, when you remove that portion, the insect damage portion, you will end up lowering the level of aflatoxin in a lot, if it's there to begin with. The second part of that slide there is about reconditioning, where we have data to support that blanching is indeed effective for lowering levels of aflatoxin. So this is, blanching is more commonly used in markets like Europe. If it fails in Europe, doesn't meet the regulatory limit, blanching is one of the accepted methods for reconditioning the product, and we do have some facilities in Europe that actually do that.
So come back to your question, Brian. It's basically really, it's a very complicated matter. Like Tim mentioned, aflatoxins are really positively correlated to insect damage level. But by sorting, rely on the sorting at the handler facility just cannot get us out of this, because the contamination of aflatoxin in nuts is just so sporadic. It's individual kernel, so random. You sorting, even though you remove those sorting material and the insect damage material, but still cannot eliminate or contaminate aflatoxin. So we're trying to ponder what's going on here. What can be done to prevent? So to do that, maybe provide a little background about how really aflatoxin being produced or generated. It's really the mold grow in a wet condition. One term mentioned about that by Tim about the water activity. Water activity is a general scientific term to describe a wetness of a condition or available free water or available water for mold to grow. So for aflatoxin producing mold to grow, they need a minimum of 0.82 water activity. If you, maybe it's too complicated to you, or too novel to you, if you times 100% would be relative humidity. So it's 82%, just keep that in mind. So aflatoxin producing mold need a minimum about 82% of relative humidity to grow. To produce aflatoxin, need to be about 90% of relative humidity. So under those conditions, those probably at the 82% relative humidity, you need to have a almond product moisture at the 8% or above. So that's what happen in a normal handling situation. Our handler receive almond, the moisture at 5 or below 6%. So unless you get a roof leak to get the water into the almond, so that won't happen. So when almond receive into handler, there's no condition support further growth or genesis of aflatoxin or the mold produce aflatoxin. So it's really in If hunter receive almond at a dry condition, you should not have concern the further accumulation of aflatoxin during warehouse storage, unless you have big mess up. So there's, we have that study showing that our recommended storage condition below 65% relative humidity. Doesn't matter how long. Those is the or at what temperature. Those moisture always below 6%. So that's just a fact. So you may
talk about some of our transportation.
Transportation.
Studies,
So you're trying to understand why we have rejects from Europe after European ports, because even though the container meet the pack requirement, they're less than 10 ppm or 8 ppm, ppb, but it's really trying to say if there's something happen during transition, during ocean shipping. So we did we did a couple in the rough preliminary monitoring data collection for the humidity and the temperature during transition shipment. So and several years ago, but they still don't think it's relevant to their, they still don't believe it. So this year we'll carry on a more comprehensive monitoring project. We insert the data, many data loggers into the box, into the product. We ship. This is one example that from collected from one box, and on top of layer of a pallet, the container is shipped from Oakland port to the one Italian port. So last more than 40 days in transition time. But you can see the highest recorded humidity, relative humidity, about 58% or less than 59%. So again, see, much below 82% of relative humidity. Under those conditions, we should not expecting any further accumulation or increase of aflatoxin.
Yeah, and Guanwei, just to point out, so the top line here, the green line is the humidity, the black line is temperature, but we ran these studies a number of times, and what we see is big fluctuations when it's just sitting at the dock, both on the front end and the tail end. And you can see that, from 1 to 2 there, that area represents the time before it's loaded on the ship, where it's sitting out there, probably getting ready to get loaded. From 2 to 3, that's actually when it's been loaded on the vessel and during transit. And what you typically see is, a stabilization that happens very quickly. We see more temperature fluctuation on this load than we normally do. This was in the summer months, so it rose a little bit. But when we've done this in the past, we've seen relative buffering effects that are happening just because in the mass of the product, you don't see a lot of changes in either temperature or humidity.
So you might see more fluctuation in temperature and humidity if you put the data tracer outside the box. But if you insert data log inside the box, embedded in the product, you have much less fluctuation. That's showing the copper box and the product provide some buffer protection. So it's really, put in a package is really help to, slowing down those fluctuate temperature change or humidity change. Even the spike in those changes, it's just day and night change, but you average out. The total exposure time in those higher conditions is not that high. Yeah, but I just say highest humidity is far below. And the next one, this one, other example, we just recently complete one shipment to Japan. So this is much shorter ocean transition time, but this is in October. So it's happening just mimic a fall season. So the highest recorded humidity is about the 60%. So still far below than 82% required for that, mold growth or aflatoxin generation. So this is just trying to share some examples showing this is not transition or ocean transition shipment, or maybe storage in a warehouse. If almond received in almonds have meet our requirement on moisture, should be a concern for further generation of aflatoxin.
Yeah, and this comes up quite often with the Japanese regulatory authorities. They want to know what happens during transit and are the conditions conducive for mold growth and aflatoxin development. And so having this data, we can go back and show them that no, we're not concerned about the ability of mold to grow or produce aflatoxin during transit. It's really important, and it takes the conversation away from this, the development of mold and aflatoxin, and then we can focus more on some of the protocols that we would like them to really look at, such as the sampling. So having this type of data, it's really important, and our GTRA team, our regulatory team, uses this when they go back to try to move the needle on sampling programs.
We're still trying to, this is just a couple of, we have one more on the way, but we are trying to gather more data from different routes or different seasons. Make sure we cover all bases. So next. So the continue on the condition required for aflatoxin producing really, there's other published papers showing, under at the temperature below 50 degrees Fahrenheit or above 109 degrees Fahrenheit, there's no aflatoxin generation. Or below, doesn't matter what water activity or humidity. Or if below 82% relative humidity, doesn't matter what temperature, you will not see any aflatoxin genesis. So this, based on those conditions, if we move to next one, so it's really, you can see, that's how those 82% relative humidity translate into the moisture of a different product. Would it be for fresh whole, for the whole only, it's about 23% moisture. If it's the in-whole, fuel run would be 15%. If it's the in-shell, would be 12%. Under those conditions, if growers or hauler sheller follow our recommendation on the stockpiling, this is when they receive, we have like a recommendation for below 9% of our in-whole almond. So those is when you receive those almond, get to the hauler sheller side, would not provide the condition for aflatoxin genesis or the aflatoxin mold growth. So it's really, unless they improperly manage. So stockpiling management is quite critical. If you have a condensation, you might create the situation. So that's why we had the session yesterday trying to provide some, refresh some knowledge, about the stockpiling. Stockpiling can be an issue, but if you follow proper procedure, I believe the more concern should be, more preventive measurement can take is in the orchard. So that's basically, I think, the message I like to get through. Maybe that Tim, you can finish with the, what a grower can do is really, to me, trying to understand science behind the aflatoxin. Really, lots of stuff we can do is on orchard floor.
Yeah, thank you, Guangwei. Really what we've discovered is it's not a simple issue.
No, not simple. Yeah.
It's complicated. There's a number of factors influencing the potential. But ultimately, this industry's made incredible progress on this issue. We're doing a fantastic job. We've learned a lot. We've learned about mitigation strategies. Tim, I bet you can summarize up, some key points on this subject, just for a takeaway.
Yeah, so we do have, kind of this, as we mentioned, this holistic strategy for mitigating aflatoxin. And, at the orchard level, good sanitation, really removing the mummy nuts. We now have these other tools, the AF36. There's, that's an atoxigenic strain. There's another one called Aflagard. We're starting to test these at a large scale to see, the efficacy over time, to see how much toxigenic strains are actually outcompeted by these non-toxigenic strains. So that's kind of, exciting to have another potential tool to combat aflatoxin. Moisture, humidity, that is a biggie here. Particularly as the product is removed from the field, you get into the hauler sheller. Moisture is so critical. If you have good moisture of the nuts coming in, that's great. You still need to make sure those in-haul almonds that are in the stockpile, that the stockpiles are maintained, that you don't have condensation that's occurring. If you do see condensation, you're venting the stockpiles. What you want to try to avoid in the stockpile is hot spots where mold can actually grow because you have elevated levels of moisture. But if you're managing that, I think the risk is relatively low. The insect damage in the orchard, is important. And then as you get into the processing side of things, there are some things that you can do to really address it in real time. We know that aflatoxin correlates very highly with insect damage. If you remove insect damage, you're going to lower the levels of aflatoxin in the product if it's there. Other reconditioning methods such as blanching are also appropriate. We're excited and happy to see that there's some new tools that some of the sorting companies are developing that will actually more focused pull out aflatoxin. There's some technologies that will fluoresce aflatoxin, so you can run product across a conveyor, run it through the machine, and it's going to kick out aflatoxin contaminated nuts. So again, a lot of different tools that are available to really address aflatoxin depending on what the challenge is for your particular operation.
Okay, thanks, Tim. And the work continues. Here's a subject that I don't think I ever would have dreamed of in 2007, but has been more recent, smoke taint. So we know there's, every year now in California, we now have fire season to add to the other 4 seasons of the year. Last few years, and some of these times, certainly up in northern regions where I have, this has been substantial. I mean, you've got a sky that's blacked out for weeks on end. You've got ash, coming down and around your orchards and in your areas. It's a concern. We know that there's been an industry, the wine industry in California, that has been significantly impacted by effects of smoke and the wildfires. So when this issue emerged, more recently, again, I really want to thank those in the staff in the industry that we decided we were going to be ahead of this, on this subject and try and understand it before it became a problem. So thankfully, with our association with Dr. Allison Mitchell at UC Davis, had done a lot of work for us. Again, I think really building on some of the things that she had done in the past, she was really equipped and ready to jump into this. So you want to give us, Guangwei, you want to give us a quick recap of what we did this last year?
I think, Timmy, do you want to give a little bit of background on this?
Or Tim can give the background.
Sure. Yeah, so, as Brian mentioned, these smoke occurrences, it seems like, it's happening every summer now, where we have these prolonged wildfires, and we've got smoke all up and down the valley, and it seems to linger for months. My wife's in the wine industry, so I understood what was going on with grapes, particularly not this past year, but the harvest before. There were a lot of wineries that were flat out rejecting grapes without any data to really support, why, but they were rejecting because of smoke taint, off flavors associated with the exposure to smoke. They've since done a lot of work to really kind of get in there and analytically determine what causes that. They've also, determined that it's really proximity to new smoke that is more of a concern. So once the smoke is, more than a day old or so, it tends to lose some of its ability to impart off flavors to the wine grapes. So I was kind of hearing about some of this information from my wife as she was telling me about, grapes that were being rejected at different wineries. And Guangwei and I were talking about, well, what is the impact to almonds? And we didn't really, understand that. But we know almonds are stockpiled, and they were being stockpiled in a lot of environments that were heavily, had heavy smoke. And sometimes early in season, the stockpiles aren't even covered. So there was definitely exposure to smoke, and we really decided a couple of years ago that it was important to gather some data. We didn't think there would be a risk, but we didn't have that data, and we didn't want to reach a situation where buyers were asking the question and we didn't have any data to support any conclusions. So with that, we decided there was an opportunity to go ahead and collect some samples. We had already had a good relationship with Dr. Mitchell at UC Davis working on a lot of volatile flavors, from a sensory quality standpoint. So we asked her to look at this for us as well.
Yeah. Just like Tim said, it's really just an opportunity just come up last year, because there's several smoke, the wildfire happened in the Chico area. We happened to load the one holler low stay horning. They just start start the new operation, basically cause a little bit delay. So end up they have piles of stockpile almond sitting there open ground without the cover. So maybe we get a committee approval to get a project, collect sample from those open stockpile, several samples from one each from each pile, from 3 variety, non-pure, Monterey, and Butte, represented different group of shell integrity, like a soft shell, semi-hard shell, hard shell. And then we collected, basically take their research team take a sample and then manually separate whole and shell and kernel, and then grinding each of those samples into the fine powder, and then put in a vial to apply heat to, equivalent, allow those volatile emit out, and then captured by, spimmy or the fiberglass, and then inject into GCMS, and then to see, maybe next slide. So we also have control sample, collected by, our other researcher, Dr. Pan is just right there. From other project, we collected from the different county. So that county have no, at that time, there's no wildfire, so we have those sample. And then the oral sample, getting injected in the GCMS, and then this is a typical, this is a typical of the major smoke tan related chemicals, volatiles. So if the product have those, you would say those spikes. Each spike or peak represent one volatile compound. There's 11 of those, basically half. Half is just isomer for the other half. I don't want to read those, fancy chemical name, huh?
Yeah, you lost me at guaiacol.
Guaiacol, okay. So basically, what we learn from this is that after, this is a spike sample, but when you extract the sample from the almond whole and shell kernel, but none of those, the identification is based on retention time or mass fragmentation pattern or spectrum. So, after this is spike sample, but if you inject without spike sample, you have any spikes from those spots. So basically indicating there is no smoke tan related compounds in almond kernel, in almond whole, almond shells. So it's basically that gave us some confidence. Say, hey, even though even we have a long-term exposure in the open air, in the area we have wildfire, but at least there is no smoke tan volatile compound absorbed into kernel. So that shouldn't be a quality concern. But the reason we didn't see the possible reason we didn't notice any volatile in the whole and shell, that need be further investigate. Maybe proximity, don't know if it's the orchard right by the wildfire site, maybe have difference. That's maybe in the future we'll have other opportunity come, maybe we can further verify, take the sample, have a long history or long information about the distance to the fire site would give us more information. But that so far so good. We don't have to worry about this.
Thank you, Guangwei. I mean, that's really good news, get out in front of an issue and understand, and of course, very, very positive results. Of course, this issue isn't going away. There may be more that needs to be done in the future, but at least certainly we can be encouraged by what we've learned so far. And I've learned about new smoke and old smoke, so I had no idea. Smoke is smoke. Shelf life.
She has a question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Please. Yeah.
maybe other industries might have done those. At least the volatile we look at is more related to the tar, this volatile, or maybe the burn wood. This is compound. But in terms of those unexpected toxic compound breaking down, we haven't we haven't done those.
Yeah.
But.
Right.
But one thing I want to share with you, our almond hull and shell actually provide some protection you never really imagine. It's probably more with deep.
Yeah.
You're looking to actually almond hull. It's a very tough portion of a plant. It's really provide a lot of protection or provide a lot of good stuff for the almond.
Certainly, yeah, produce and yeah. Yeah, I know you bring up a great point. When these wildfires rage through, it's more than just forests, right? There's houses and cars and all these other things. Okay, shelf life, our last subject. Hopefully we're staying on schedule, close. With the larger crops around the world, it's important to understand practices that impact almond quality and, of course, shelf life. Guangwei, you've been a champion on this subject, helping to provide guidance and tools for industry to maximize almond shelf life. You want to tell us give us an overview of what we've learned on this subject?
This committee have invested, funded several projects over the years on that, to trying to understand, how storage condition, humidity, temperature, or packaging and the processing affect the shelf stability and the shelf life of different type of almond. But I have good passion of this. We have lots of information. I know we ran out of time, but if I kind of nimbling around, take too much time, you stop me, okay?
Yeah.
So basically, I really want to share with you, almond is a low moisture product. Low moisture also contain high level of antioxidants, vitamin E in the flesh, and then the phytochemicals in the skin. They have, and they also have a very good fatty acid profile, make almond very stable. Properly handled, they can have a very long shelf life potential. But again, even have a very good potential. But it's a live seed. Even in the environment, it's a live seed. They can breathe the air, right? They can interact. It's interact with the environment condition. When at the dry condition, they could lose moisture. But the high humidity condition, they can pick up moisture, absorb moisture. Because those moisture change, they can change the dynamic in the composition, or stimulate some biological activity. So if the moisture get too high, you can improve probably facilitate the mold growth and it cause quality degeneration. So there is what you can do. The simplest way is wrap around with a package. You're going to prevent those interactions. You're going to keep product in very good condition. Basically, that's just background. So over the years, we invest in several projects. If you can slide, there's one. I just want to share some information from a couple of shelf life study project we did. This project with the University of Georgia, with Dr. Ron Peck's team. This is several years ago. This 2-year shelf life on the raw and roast non-pure almond. For raw almond, we package in two packaging condition. One is a polypropylene plastic bag, mimic a retail packaging condition, and then small boxes mimic our bulk shipping condition, the carton box condition. And then for the roast product, we package in polypropylene plastic bag, and the other ones are high barrier aluminum pouches. So we're trying to understand storage at a different condition, different combination of humidity and temperature condition. What we learned, this one we narrowed down to 2 humidity conditions, because previous project we already know, humidity above 65 or about 70% going to shorten shelf life. So that we only focus on 2 shelf life. from what we learned from this project, definitely if we follow our recommended storage condition, almond can, can have more than 2 year shelf life. But what we learned, if we put it just in a cardboard box, we might have to, reduce the relative humidity need by further. 65 probably doesn't do any maybe doesn't help to maximize the shelf life. And the second project we did was
Sorry, Guangwei, I'm getting ahead.
okay.
I wasn't sure what you were talking about.
Oh, okay. So basically, I think you're trying to remind me we're running out of time. So basically, recent project we finished, other 2 year shelf life project, with the same research team we did with the, this time we look at raw in-shell and raw shell almond. We look at two varieties, build and padre. Look at different shell texture or suture condition. So say if there's difference between different type of variety with a different type of shell. So this was the packaging that, look at the two relative humidity condition, 55 and 70 degree. So again, show this our product packaged in the woven bag, the pouches. So this is much less protection than the plastic bag, but it's probably similar to the cardboard box. So, and then what we learn, under those conditions, we have a, 2 year shelf life, but not all conditions. Just some conditions we cannot have a 2 year shelf life. But if you store the 15 degree Fahrenheit, that's a 59 degree Fahrenheit, 59 C, the 15 C. So at that 55% relative humidity, would you have, good shelf life. Now you can move to the next one, Tim. So what I want to share with you, there's a very simple highlight. What we learned from our 2 shelf life study, basically we found out use a polypropylene bag can increase shelf life by more than 7 months. So if it really depends on how you want to do it. If you use a high barrier bag, like an aluminum pouch, similar type, have a high barrier property against oxygen or moisture migration, you can extend shelf life by more than 17 months. But in terms of storage condition-wise, if that temperature decrease by 10 degrees C, that's 18 degrees Fahrenheit, you would increase the shelf life about 6 months. If you decrease the relative humidity by 10%, you can increase shelf life by more than 4 months. That's how environmental condition will affect shelf life. What we learned from, basically from, this is their equation to estimate the shelf life you can have. So based on this, the equation, we might, if we want to have a shelf life about 2 years without packaging, we might have to change our recommendation to 55% relative humidity, which is equivalent to the 5% moisture. I don't know who decided, under a receiving criteria of 5%, I think they done their work. That's actually, at those conditions, we have a maximum optimal condition for shelf life, maximum shelf life. And then in terms of in-shell, if you store the in-shell, you can enjoy 4 to 8 months longer shelf life compared to shell counterpart. But there is a build and padre shell kernel, because it's slightly difference in the fat content, fatty acid composition. So Lamprey, have a slightly longer shelf life than build kernel. But if it's an in-shell condition, both is a comparable shelf life. So there's lots of information on the shelf life. Like Tim said, I can talk to you probably more than 1 hour about this one topic. But I'm just stay here with this, and I'm going to allow you have a couple questions. Lots of information we have on our website, and then we're trying to come up with some good fact sheet for you to share.
I guess we should acknowledge Dr. Ron Pegg, who's worked on this with his team at University of Georgia, worked on this, knows some information for a number of years. So a lot of good work and understanding. Well, incredible body of knowledge, a lot of research that
Oh, yeah.
continues. We continue to build off on, really impressive. I want to thank Tim and Guang Wei, and, you know, we do have a couple of minutes. We're happy while you have the experts here on either side of me. I'm sure they're happy to answer questions, or I know they'll be around afterwards, and you can certainly find them later in the conference as well. So, thank you. Yeah, one question. When moisture's too low, what would be too low for moisture? We did learn in some of our studies that you can get to a point, certainly a dry roasted product, that you start to lose shelf life.
So basically, I didn't mention about too much of those conditions. Basically, for shelf life, you know, is really, hinge on the consumer rejection. We based on the 25% consumer panelist rejection. So those is really for the raw almond. The consumer rejections are driven by texture change. So if you have texture, get the, lost the crunch texture, you get the more rejection. But if a roast almond, the more on the oil oxidation, rancidity, as a driver for the rejection. But in terms of the quality, the moisture level for raw almond, probably optimal moisture ranges will be 3 to 5%. But if below 3%, actually the almond kernel becomes become fragile. During handling, you might cause more breakage, cause some damage to the surface. Those tend to and then internally in the kernel, the moisture and oil kind of lose balance. So oil starting migrate out. So you can starting to create some situation prone for the oil oxidation. So we tried for raw almonds, trying to stay above 3% relative moisture. But for roast almond, if you handle properly, you slowly allow the moisture dissipate and then maintain integrity of cellular structure. Even the moisture much lower, you are dealing with a different situation. You already run through some chemical reaction, so you are facing volatile changes. So that proper moisture is not a big factor as the other volatiles.
So there is a sweet spot.
For the raw almond.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I just so more into look into it. I so respect whoever decided 5% criteria for handle receiving. That's unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah. In the back? Yeah, that's you. Yeah, it's you. Yeah, thanks, Josh. So, there's obviously there's different capabilities and markets around the world and availability. I mean, we have done the research across a number of different conditions, packaging types, and situations.
But it's really based on, in terms of packaging, it's a very complicated answer. You ask a lot of questions. So, everyone's different. So the packaging really, even though we use one package, you based on really transmission rate, water transmission rate, and then air transmission rate. So you based on that choose different material based on that to use those. In terms of the different situation, different destination, I think, one thing definitely you want to, if you ship to some customer have, high humidity, high temperature condition, you definitely probably should pay attention. But one thing I want to ensure, almond have a very good berry property. You even packaging our cardboard box, they actually they can, slow down the heat transfer or even moisture transfer quite good. If it's not very long shipping, I don't think, or sit in a high humidity condition too long, I think we should feel reasonably good about our product. I mean, you.
So that's a
were
good
in the
point. No,
business.
even the box is a barrier, and there's some benefits there. And I think to the other point of that, certainly, not only the different various markets, but customers, there's a whole spectrum of what customers and, certain customers in certain markets, they'll only take, reefer containers at certain times of the year. So, not one answer. Sorry, Josh. I think we've got time for one more question. Sure.
Hi, Aflatoxin regarding shelf life.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking at the University of Georgia, and most of the shelf life sample are done in like smaller packaging.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if there's any study that's done on like maybe something like a pallet or like using packaging materials like sugar size or like boxes, and I want to see if that translates to like a
We haven't done those, but I think, one thing, as I say, you have a big bulker, bigger container, you have a, probably better protection for the portion of the product inside. But our country in a small package mimic the worst case scenario, mimicking the surface part, maybe in the toe on the top layer. So that's what we look at. But definitely the product in, deeper down in a big toe, you probably have much longer shelf life than the surface. But our conditions, mimic those extreme conditions. We haven't done those. I think it's worthwhile to look into it. But it's so hard to do because you take a sample, where you take a sample from top, from the middle. It's so hard.
Well, you got to have some pretty big environmental chambers.
Oh, yeah, you have a huge environment
Yeah,
chamber.
that's a challenge. Okay, one more? Okay.
I've learned a little bit about aflatoxins and rejection and stuff like that. It's very interesting to see the data that during transition, there's not much of a correlation between aflatoxin levels rising. With the EU and third-party labs in the EU compared to the data of labs here, when you compare the results of the aflatoxin levels, how different are some of those results from the EU third-party labs, the labs in California, compared to differences of the results from a third-party lab in California, in Japan, or other countries? And have you considered to start a case study where you compare the third-party results in Europe with California and compare the third-party results with other countries and leverage that data of the comparison to kind of create a global benchmark of testing procedures for all third-party labs?
Yeah, that's a good question. Tim, I'll let you jump in, but the biggest thing about aflatoxin is really sampling variability. And, the good news that, when we got the Codex, EU to adopt the Codex standard protocol, we're now following the same methodology. And then, of course, the labs being used in California for almonds are all USDA certified labs. So we know there's a credible consistency now between California and Europe, following the 2 by 10 kilogram sampling protocol. In Japan, it's a little bit different. So that's where some of the challenge has been, getting Japan to also, follow a codex, a global standard, because that's certainly where you're going to see the most variability. It's related to sampling. And I don't know if you have anything else, Tim, you want to?
Yeah, and some of the European labs do participate in FOPIS testing. All the USDA-approved labs do too. It's a ring test where they're getting samples analyzed, spike samples, and analyzing and testing proficiency of the labs. So there is a little bit of that that's happening. As far as we don't have really data that's coming into us from the EU labs that are doing the testing on aflatoxin. It's very hard to get them to share information. But to Brian's point, we do know that majority of the air is going to be associated with sampling. And we've had Dr. Tom Whitaker really look at this. It is a big portion of the air. It's how you're collecting that sample and how you're preparing that sample. It's going to have the biggest impact on variability. So if we can focus on that and make sure that procedures are consistently applied from a sampling standpoint and grinding and a sample prep standpoint, you'll eliminate a lot of that variability associated with aflatoxin testing. Now, the other side of it too is, it's just difficult to test for aflatoxin. In some cases you find it, in some cases you don't. And we'll make a comment on a Japan consignment that was shipped over. This is J-Spec, really high quality product that was shipped to Japan. It failed. The handler notified us. We told the handler we wanted to get in and analyze this product. When it came back, we pulled 20 samples following the PEC protocol. So that would be 20 kilogram samples, so 20 times 20. So we sampled it 20 times that way. I think, Bryce, were you helping sample? Our shoulders were pretty sore as we were probing those bins all day because we collected a lot of sample. We also collected 20 samples following the Japanese protocol, which is a little bit different. It's 3 5-kilogram samples that are pulled. And anyways, we analyzed all of these and we found aflatoxin, I think, in 2 or 3 of the samples that we analyzed at levels less than 10 part per billion. So it's really hard when you're testing for aflatoxin, particularly in really high quality product. And if you find it one time, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to find it again.
All right, thank you. We're running a little long, so we're going to conclude the program today. Thank you for your time. Just to go over a couple quick points, I know the lunch, if you have a ticket, is going to be down the hall in the ballroom. Following the lunch, the trade show will continue with our 270 exhibitors. We've got at 1:30 exhibit hall, there will be snacks sponsored by BASF. Thank you very much. Also, there'll be a poster session in Hall 8. And the next presentations will begin at 2:45 this afternoon. Have a great day and rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.